Hello,
Hey,
everybody. This is Kent Trammell with Henry. I'll be moderating for him for our second live stream. And he's basically going to be picking up where he left off with the first one and continuing that same sculpture and looking at blocking out forms and adding clay to armatures again. So, Henry, you take it away.
you bet, Kent. Thanks. So, if some of you weren't here last time, we've got sculpture. I've got this mirror set up so you can see it from the side view. Of course, you're noticing it from the top here in the center, but it's actually two figures interacting with each other. And my idea was having sort of a superhero fighting some, mega villain, some mutant, massive creature. So I have a couple of basic wire armatures, but they're a little unique because they're actually connected with telescoping brass. So in the meantime, the last time we just had the basic armature and the telescoping pieces, and I was still thinking through how I was going to actually create the piece. So what I've done in the meantime was bulk out my superhero with some super sculpey firm clay and attach the telescoping pieces that fit onto our monster onto the arms here so they'll stay connected. And I've actually started sculpting the hand right onto our villain here, and he'll be able to separate from this other character, so I'll be able to sculpt detail onto the front of the body here without this being in the way. But right now I'm mainly interested in just bulking this out.
Is that
And
a common technique, Henry, to use like the telescoping brass like you did?
it is for people who do like character or figurines and things. I think people who use maybe like a wax or something might actually sculpt in different little like sockets
Okay.
and pins that hold pieces together. But this is a pretty common practice for people who are creating like figurines and stuff so that they can pull the pieces apart and be able to sculpt on it. And this is kind of the whole purpose of doing this two figures was to show this as an option for a more complex armature.
Okay.
A lot of times you might create a character who's really complicated and say you want to be able to remove an arm or a leg and work on it in more detail, or just basically get it out of the way so you can sculpt on the figure better, or it might even make it easier to mold it as a simpler form. But in this case, I did it just so we could pull these two characters apart. And this is just a common brass tubing from a company called K&S, and it comes in graduated sizes that telescope into each other. And underneath the foil here, let me just peel all this back for you so you can see what you might have missed the last time. Now, if you watch the other video, you'll see the armature from our last hangout. But it's basically just some wire underneath here. I don't know if that's visually reading for you, but it's twisted up and holding together, and then the brass tube is just slipped right on top of it.
Okay. Wow. I mean,
And
it's crazy that you just dive into that and rip it back like it's nothing.
yeah, I mean, and that's that's something you have to get more comfortable with. You
Uh-huh.
have to be able to know that you can just tear this thing apart. Looking at this figure, I'm turning it around, and somewhere along the way I noticed that like the proportions of these two legs got off somewhere. So like this knee here is bugging the heck out of me. The shin bone is a different length here from one side to the other. Let me see if I've got some dividers here. I'm just going to double check it. I'm just going to compare these two sides. So if you watch over here, you can kind of see what I'm doing. So I'm using these dividers just to check the length of the leg. Oh, and it's not as far off as I thought, but it is a little bit shorter
Okay.
than I'd like. So one of the things I'm going to do is just get in here and really work with this joint before I actually start bulking anything out on it. So he's screwed down to the base, but I really don't need to worry about that. I can just grab on with a couple of pliers.
Are you game to answer one question here that we've got, Henry?
Sure.
Okay, so we've got one from Sarah Bobby, and actually, first I'm going to answer one from Robert Incalada, because I think he's asking based on Google Translate, is this about sculpting in Blender? And as you can probably tell by now, we're talking about traditional sculpting with clay, but we plan on having many of these live streams with different authors, and some of them will be Blender authors, so keep an eye out for that. The question from Sarah Bobby, I am interested in learning sculpting. I know basic 3D and I use Blender. What is your opinion? Do I have to start with the software or real clay and tools to learn sculpting? Which is better in your opinion?
I don't think you necessarily have to start with it. You know, if it's what's available to you, it's a great way to start sculpting. But I think going with traditional mediums and doing traditional sculpture and life drawing and creating you know, traditional art is always good for an artist to help them. You know, the main thrust of learning this and working with sculpture is to help you guys sort of work on that switch of flipping between 2D and 3D. I think it's really important for every artist to be able to conceptualize from a drawing to physical volumes. And you can be sculpting, but it's probably a good idea to actually like pick up a pencil and take some figure drawing and work with some real clay. You'll learn things that you're not going to pick up you know, working with a computer program. Kent will tell you that you know, he's thought that you know, just he thought sculpting in the computer was a little bit easier because you've got you know, automatic symmetry and things like that. And when you're sculpting in the real world, you've got to think about symmetry and volume, and it's just that exercise that really helps to train your eye. You know, it could be really easy to let, you know, to not necessarily let the computer do it, but you know, to get a little lazy about that, and not, I don't even mean to say it that way, but sure. To not really train your eye to look at those volumes and think about that symmetry. Now, your eye's going to get trained anyway, just because you're recognizing it as you're working, but it's a really great exercise to actually do some physical sculpting and have to think about that symmetry and adding volume to one side or another and seeing it for yourself in 3D. And actually the step that we're going to take with this piece now in sort of visualizing and blocking out the volumes is something that I sort of think of like a figure drawing. And I did some early sketches of this piece, and I was going to draw over top of this, but kind of ran out of time. You know, how I saw these two figures and sort of an angle of view of, say, you know, this being our superhero here, and his leg coming up and kicking the villain in the face here, and his other leg being held by the villain's arm. So, you know, it was kind of a rough sketch I did to start it. And when I built the armature, I thought about, you know, the length of those forms and you know, what they represented. And essentially, you know, my drawing here, which is what I might use to block in a figure drawing, is exactly what this armature looks like underneath all this foil, you know, in a simplified form. You know, we've got a forearm of the character, the upper arm, the shoulders, the torso, the hips, and the legs here for the monster, and then our superhero stretched across here with different angles. Now there's foreshortening going on, so it's a little hard to understand, but it's essentially the same sort of blocking you do to start a figure drawing. You know, just making sure your piece is going to fit on the page, sort of finding the gesture, the pose, and the dynamics of it. And the next step we're going to do is conceptualize the volumes of that character, and that's sort of the next step you'd want to do with a figure drawing. Now that's just how my my teachers had taught me,
Mm-hmm.
and this is sort of the, sort of stepping back to the basics of it, but essentially just imagining all of these shapes as cylinders and using, just what I know about perspective drawing and cylinders to be able to block in these volumes. So I'm just looking at the profiles of the volumes for the piece and thinking about how wide I want this leg as opposed to its length. And I'm just sort of, really roughly blocking that in. And then simplified forms for, say, like a rib cage. This arm's somewhat hidden by the body in this view. So you can see I'm starting to block out that form.
Right. How bulky do you plan on making the monster? Is he
I want
really
him to
large?
be, yeah, I want him to be sort of like mutant and huge and muscular. I've never really sculpted, sort of a mutant character who's just, exploding with muscles, and that's what I want to do with this guy is something, just that massive mutant
Yeah, that's awesome.
bodybuilder, exploding, and then. I haven't really even thought it through other than sort of the pose and the expression, but I haven't really even thought through the details or how humanoid he is or
Right.
that type of thing. But we don't really need to concern ourselves with that. What I really want to do in this particular lesson is just sort of block everything out.
Yeah. Okay.
So we can see the basics of the form just like that, and then let's see, let's put a different color on top. Just grab the green here and I'll do some more complex pieces or shapes, for his foot. Now his leg is trapped inside of the hand here of the creature,
Yeah.
but I can go ahead and draw it through. And when I do figure drawing, I've kind of gotten beyond the point of actually, conceptualizing with cylinders. But something like this, I might do it, or I might just go to, more complex shapes that I'm familiar with, that I would expect to see, knowing that the say the upper thigh is going to taper down to the knee like this, and I might see some cut in here between the tendons, and I can just sort of rough in a calf and
Right.
do some more sophisticated shapes. When you're starting out, I think it's always smart to go back to basics, and every once in a while I have to stop myself and do that when I start to see my proportions getting weird, or just noticing that my drawing isn't as solid as I would hope. Because when you're drawing these more organic shapes, you can fool yourself and get your proportions funky and not be as precise. So essentially, I'm just doing this as an exercise to sort of show you guys the similarities between the two. But I would definitely recommend that everybody goes out and finds a figure drawing class, either like a social group that meets locally, and they're in every city I've ever been in, or check out like junior colleges and things that are nearby. I find those are really great, and at least in California and some of the states, very inexpensive. So you can go for like a 10-week course for much less than you would pay to hire in a model for that time.
Oh, definitely. Do you yourself do figure drawing? Like, you've been doing this for so many years. Do you like occasionally want to refresh and be like, let's get some teaching again?
I haven't lately, but it's kind of unusual. I actually I'm always taking some kind of an art course just to be around other artists and stuff, especially if you're like freelancing and sort of isolated in your studio. It's great to get out and run into other artists, and I think what other artistic experiences feed back to whatever you're working on.
Yeah.
I've always found that other mediums and techniques and other people's art just inspire me and make me want to do things differently. I'll discover things. Everybody here has probably taken a course at some point, and if you're like me, you probably found out that you learned almost as much from the other people in your class as you did from the instructor and, the class itself. Just like sharing your questions and things like that. I think that's what's great about communities like this. It's sort of opened it up a little bit, that we can all sort of share and inspire each other. So anyway, that's enough of the drawing. You kind of get the idea that I want to bulk this stuff out. So
one thing I should probably mention is we've changed up the form for those of you watching, the format a little bit, where we're going to focus a little more on the topic that Henry is sculpting, and then for the last 15 minutes we're going to answer your questions. So feel free to post your questions, so they can start to collect, and then we'll answer as many as we can in the last 15 minutes. But anyway, go ahead, Henry.
Yeah, great. So so that's where we're going, is trying to bulk this thing out and visualize these volumes, and that's what I've already started before you got here. I started that with by applying foil in bulk to our armature. I did the same thing to the superhero here, and then I've started to cover him with a firm super sculpting material, and just started blocking him in, and I went beyond the basic shapes and volumes to more sophisticated shapes that I understand the human body would do. Mm-hmm. So I spent probably just a couple of hours today working on the armature a little bit, and then throwing this clay on top of the form. And you can see I haven't gotten into any specific details. It's very much of a mannequin still at this point. There's some shape and things, but what I'm trying to get to are just the basic suggestions of the volumes, and that's really helping me refine the pose and the proportions. And that's something I really want to lock down before I jump into a lot of detail. And it's the kind of thing where I'll block this thing in and maybe even live with it for a day or two before I jump into further detail. It's one of those things where I'll walk away from it, and when I come back, I'll start to see problems with volume and proportions. So you don't always have the luxury of that kind of time. So that's kind of the idea of training your eye to be able to sort of switch back and forth between being the artist and or train your eye and your mind to switch back and forth between being the artist and being critical of your work. Mm-hmm. It's sort of flipping that switch back and forth. But I'm actually pretty happy with the proportions and things, and he's starting to feel correct. So.
Do you ever find it difficult to exercise that discipline? I know that I can get so excited about what I'm sculpting that I don't give it the proper time, like you said, like walk away from it for a day.
Yeah, I totally do, and but if I'm excited about it and sculpting, it's hard for me to do that. You want to just jump into it, but I think that's where your experience comes in, and that's that kind of thing you mentioned earlier about not being afraid to tear into it.
Right.
It's knowing that there's an issue with it, and either hopefully spotting it sooner than later, so that you can repair it. Digitally, sometimes it's a little easier to repair. Like in ZBrush, we can turn down the resolution, or and make some adjustments maybe in proportions. In this kind of thing, hopefully we'd be happy with the proportions from almost every angle before we lock it down with a lot of detail and things
Right.
that we'd have to redo.
Right.
So you guys probably saw this laying here on my bench. It's Bridgman's Complete Guide to Drawing from Life. I think it's a great resource and value for the human form. He does some really great sketches in here and talks about everything from shape to rhythm to volume, and it's very expressive. I really like the sort of hard and soft structures that he creates in the characters, and of course he gets into all the detail. This is kind of a compendium of all his books, so it covered everything from the body to the face, to a lot of anatomy, and even working with drapery and things. But it's something that I like to reference a lot when I'm sculpting, because I just love the way he uses sort of a nice combination of hard and soft edges and rhythms of lines and light and shadow, and those are things I like to get into my sculptures, or at least I'm really striving to get that. Some of the best art directors I know have the similar background where they've sat down and copied this book, and just the experience of doing that, you sort of you read the text and you start to understand what he's thinking, but you also sort of absorb it like osmosis. If you can draw like Bridgman, you're on your way. So it's great reference for me. I like to look at it and start to think about anatomy and stuff. The way he sort of stylizes the figure and hard and soft shapes is really great for me. So I like to have that nearby whenever I'm sculpting. I'll just find something like I know there's a couple of good pictures of torsos in here, and I just love to reference them for the shapes and things, and that's really, we're not getting into any more detail in this blocking than what you'd see in these loose sketches.
Right. How far back does that book go? Like, as far as time?
When was this published? I'm not quite sure how old he is. Let's see. This first edition was from 19. There's a 52. 24. Looks like 1924 was the earliest. This, like I said, this was a compendium of like all of his books.
Okay.
He did a book on the female form in 35, something called The Human Machine in 39. The Bridgman's Life Drawing was published originally in 1924. So, he's from the early 20th century, and that was sort of the the golden age of illustration. So, that's when you're before printing pictures of photography really took off. That really didn't happen until after the Second World War and in the 50s and 60s. Before that, it was all illustration. So a lot of people were learning to draw from him, and also let's see, couple other books here that I think are really good.
Yeah, something that's fascinating about the history for me and history of artists. So thanks for looking that up.
Oh, sure. There's Andrew Loomis is really awesome. He does. You can see these are very indicative of advertising illustration, which is what he did, and some of his character work and stuff. He just basically could draw anybody at any angle. And he gets into facial proportions, and the thing I love about it is he does a really wonderful breakdown of how children are different than at different ages. So he'll start with even really young children and then move up through the ages. And if you had to draw a child that was like 8 or 9 years old, this book's invaluable. To just sort of find those subtleties. And this is a book I need to dive into. I've seen several sculptors recommend it. It's a book on strength training anatomy, but what's great about it is it's really well illustrated with a breakdown of these sort of hypermuscular people, right? And so it's a breakdown of muscular people like on a Mr. Universe. So I'm real excited to use that reference as I'm starting to get into the more muscular details of this guy here.
Yeah, definitely.
And then some this Lanteri book on sculpting the human figure is just more about basic breakdowns and proportions and things. Much simpler illustrations, but all very valuable information in here.
Yeah,
so
fantastic.
So
a quick question for you, relevant question for you. A. Calderon is asking, what's wrapped around the foil on the mutant character?
Yeah, it's just black twine. And it's there to help hold the foil on and sort of compress it, and so it's just like a black kite string. And actually, you would use they make a thread that's called it's like button thread, and it's a heavier duty sewing thread that's used to hold buttons on.
Yeah.
But I actually just used this string so that you could visually see it.
Okay.
So it works great. It's wrapped around there. It's helping to hold it on the form. The foil's a little loose and stuff, but I'm not too concerned about that.
Okay. And you use that same technique with the clown bust, correct? Around the neck?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And that's one where I actually did a loop around and tied it. Right. And that's what helps to hold this down. It's a little loose. I've been messing with it a bit, so. But yeah, that's exactly the technique.
Very cool.
So this guy. So yeah, this is covered with Super Sculpey, and the first pass on it, it tends to get kind of doughy and stuff, and you'll see it as I'm starting to cover this piece. Mm-hmm. But as I'm working with it and starting to be happy with the forms, I'm going in with my fingers and thumbs and starting to define some muscles. Maybe I'll go in here and indicate a depression along the spine, and just some quick shadow lines with my thumbnail to indicate the scapula, maybe a pinch in here. And I'm really not using any tools at this point. It's all with just my fingers for this blocking bit of it.
Yeah.
So anyway, we'll come back to this piece. I want to start bulking out our behemoth here.
Yeah.
So what I'm using is just an inexpensive, heavy-duty aluminum foil, and underneath this, it's nothing more than just a single wire, running down, and it's been twisted and formed into this shape. And I'm using the foil for a couple of reasons. With the Super Sculpey especially, it's a fairly expensive clay, and I want to take up as much volume as possible. Super Sculpey works best when it's say a quarter of an inch to a half-inch thick, and you don't want to waste a lot of material just making it a solid form. So this actually has some foil underneath, and it affords me some flexibility if I decide to change the pose, or say I want to dig into the form somewhere. I've got a little cushion of foil, and I can actually do the surgery, similar to what we did with the zombie clown,
right.
Where I had to dig into it. But what I can do with this foil is start to visualize those cylinders and volumes, the way I would when I was like figure drawing.
Right.
So
I've actually got a question for you that could go along with exactly what you're saying, but Lamont Robinson, is asking, so with a figure in such a dynamic pose, how are the proportions kept correctly?
Well, it's just it's kind of up to me to be aware of them. One of the things I'll do is when I built this armature, I built it in a T-pose essentially. I built it very basically in a simple form, and worked on my proportions. Sometimes you can maybe tie a a popsicle stick or some kind of a structure to the form. Say if you want to keep the upper leg stiff and just have it bend at the knee, you could actually stiffen this area with some two-part epoxy or by tying a structure to it. It's the same thing some animators would do with really simplified wire armatures. It keeps it from bending anywhere else but where you want it to. Then once I got that T-pose the way I felt it was correct, then I went in and bent it into this shape, you know, and just sort of posed it.
Gotcha. That makes a lot of sense. You do the measurements once in T-pose, and then
exactly. You know, a lot of the stuff we do in digital is just, you know, it's a digital form of what real sculptors are doing. So
right, that's funny.
Yeah. So even this guy started out, you know, even though he's in this crazy dynamic pose, you know, I more or less had a humanoid form and bent him up like this. So
Gotcha.
I knew I was going to be sticking the hand and the foot on outside of the creature's hands, so I truncated at that point, but I knew I had the right proportions and stuff. So
Gotcha.
yeah, and then from there on, it's kind of up to you to just keep taking measurements. You know, the way I did with these calipers. I saw something that looked a little funky on between these two legs, and I just did a quick measurement to make sure that, you know, it was either something I was seeing was fooling me, or I had an error that I wanted to correct. You know.
Gotcha.
So I'm not going to add a whole lot of more foil to this. I just kind of want to get you comfortable with the idea. Now the foil actually takes up this volume, like I said, to help you save clay and make it easier to work with Super Sculpey or with something like this monster clay that's reusable, or any other kind of clay. It actually helps, you know, that it's all crinkled up like this. It gives the clay something to stick to. You can imagine how if it was just wrapped around a piece of wire, it's going to want to spin and do weird stuff, or, you know, just work its way loose. When it's going to grip around this crumpled up foil, and we can actually pre-crumple it before I stick it on, it's going to give it something to grip to and keep it more secure to the model.
Right. Okay.
And right before we started our hang, I took my Super Sculpey, my monster clay, and I threw it in the microwave for a couple minutes. So I've got a tub of fairly soft clay here. I'm just going to cut off a piece of thread. Actually bit it off. Don't recommend that.
So are you doing one of the characters in Monster Clay and another character in Super Sculpey?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
I am. Well, and almost more for practical reasons that one, I didn't have enough Super Sculpey for this character, and two, I wanted you to be able to see the contrast between the two characters.
Yeah.
If they're both the same color clay, it's not going to be easy to see the difference, right? So it just made a lot of sense to go with the Monster Clay, because I think Monster Clay does come in a gray color. It's pretty unusual. I usually just see the sort of chocolate brown.
Yeah.
That's what I have. So
are there any big, like, I guess, pitfalls? I guess I wouldn't have a thought to mix two clays together, two mediums in the same sculpture.
There can be. I'm working on another piece now that has. I'm making it in Monster Clay, but he has. He's holding a sailboat, and he's got a couple of. I wanted his hands to be firm and detailed, so I'm making those pieces, his hands and the sailboats, in CX5, that hard wax material.
Right.
And the only challenge there is the transition between the Monster Clay and the CX5. I've had to go in and work on the CX5 a couple of times, and one clay will contaminate the other, but I just peel it off, and it's a small amount of clay. I just toss it away.
Okay.
So there could be some cross contamination here, but hopefully by the way I connect it together and the way I treat that seam, I'm probably going to come up with some obvious difference, like wristbands or something like that, where I can have the hands go with the super villain, and the rest of the body be with this, that I could mold it.
Gotcha.
So I'm not going to get too detailed in tying all these knots off and things. It's good enough. In fact, you've seen me wrap enough string. Let's put some clay on this guy. My tub is, is everybody familiar with Monster Clay? So if you're not, this is what it looks like. It's a 5-pound tub, and it's really great. It's a wax clay, so it is an oil-based clay, but it's got a very heavy wax base to it, and what that means is that at room temperature it's fairly hard and stiff, but when it's slightly warmed it's very soft and pliable. And they actually market it in this tub that's meant to be dropped in an oven or put in the microwave for a minute or two to actually soften the clay up. So it's really brilliant marketing. It doesn't have any kind of a smell to it. It's been probably it's been more than a half hour since I microwaved this, and it's still hot and really soft just down inside there. So it's wonderful stuff to work with. If you guys have watched any of the videos on working with clay, it's it's definitely got advantages over something like Chavant clay, which was my old favorite. It looks very similar to it, but it doesn't have any kind of the sulfur smell and things that clay did.
I'm surprised it keeps its heat or malleability for so long after heating it up.
It is pretty remarkable, and I think it might have might have some paraffin or something like that in it, which is that paraffin wax is like an insulator. So if it's warm on the interior, it's actually holding its heat.
Oh, wow.
It's insulating itself.
Yeah, that's brilliant.
So, yeah, it's pretty cool. Some gobs of it here. It's actually, it's warm and soft at the very core, and it's hardened up toward the edge of the tub here, so hopefully I can get enough out of here. It's a little stiff, but so I'm just doing the same thing I did when visualizing that volume. I wrapped the foil around it, but I know I'm much smaller than what my finished piece was. I know I can add, probably at least a 1/4 inch of volume on top of it and get to the shapes and forms that I want. And speaking of symmetry and stuff, that's when I start to pay attention to that sort of thing, is when I'm bulking it out like this. I might even get to the point where I'll actually, make 2 bits of clay as it's getting refined. Say I want to add something on, I'll make sure I'm working with 2 very similar volumes of clay that I'm adding on, just to make sure that I'm maintaining some symmetry with the volumes.
Oh wow, and form them at both the same time with both hands.
But this is kind of the stage where he's going to be all kind of lumpy and very soft and mushy. He's not defined at all.
Wow.
Just getting him covered. And I'm kind of thinking ahead to, almost pre-visualizing, what he'll be when he's done. I'm sort of visualizing this cool rippled muscles down his back, and a lot of tension in here where he's holding the superhero character and trying to restrain him, and all his muscles are tensed up.
Right.
And just start to indicate, make sure I know where his spine is, that type of thing. Have we got a good sized crowd watching, Kent?
Yeah, we're doing pretty good. We got about 11 viewers. It's been fluctuating between 15 and 11. Do what?
I can't hear you. Can you hear me?
Oh, yeah, I can hear you.
Oh, okay. Now I can hear you.
Oh, sorry about that.
That's okay.
We've been fluctuating between 10 and 11 or 10 and 15. So yeah, it's been a good crowd.
Oh, good.
Yeah, I've got a couple questions for you. Actually, one might be relevant right now since you talked about heating up clay.
Sure.
Wes Burke asked, are there any dangers to keep in mind with sculpting, heating up clay, fumes, etc.?
It depends on the clays you're working with. Some of the clays are kind of smelly, like the Chavants and things. I think Monster Clay is fairly safe. If you follow the instructions on the box, you'll be good. It doesn't need to be microwaved very long or heated. Just follow the instructions. They recommend just microwaving it for, say, like a minute. And as the volume gets down in the container, it's going to take less. The one danger you could have is that the clay can actually get liquid and molten, and you could stand a danger of burning yourself. So just don't overheat it and approach it with caution. Just touch your finger to it really quick and make sure it's not too hot to touch.
Gotcha.
Let's see. We're doing okay with time. So in this guy, I haven't even, sort of thought through and visualized the expression I would put on this guy's face, but I haven't really thought him through as a full-on character and, what his mutation is other than just all these massive muscles and things, how grotesque his face might be.
Right. Is it common for you to work like this where you'll have an idea like I want a dynamic pose between two fighting characters and then you'll block it in without actually finalizing the concept beforehand?
Yeah, sometimes. It was kind of a fun little exercise. I knew what I wanted to get to with this sort of muscled out guy, and I'm just waiting for some inspiration to hit me. I'm not far enough along where where I can't regroup, but I am at the point where I'm going to have to sort of finalize my design, and it's actually sort of helpful at this point. I can actually use this to sort of sketch from and throw some ideas on it. So I wouldn't say it's typical, but it's a fun way to work for me. So
gotcha. Seems fun.
Kind of
keep it free.
Think it through.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're about 15 minutes left in the live stream, so I've got, let's see, a couple of questions for you to answer. This one's from, let's see, Matt Musia, and he's asking, does the microwave deteriorate the clay properties after a certain amount of time if you heat it in that same tub, I think is the question.
I haven't noticed it yet, no. It seems to, just keep going forever, so I haven't noticed any degrade in it at all.
Okay, that's pretty cool.
I think it's, it might pick up dust and dirt and get contaminated somehow, but that's the only thing you'd have to really worry about.
Gotcha. That's impressive. It
is.
And let's see, one more from, let's see, I'm going to get this wrong, Maxime Megayithier. Sorry, I butchered that, I'm sure. But he says, unfortunately, I didn't know the wrap-a-string technique, so when I use aluminum, this one passing through my clay, how could you make the skeleton thinner without removing all the clay?
Well...
Doesn't seem possible.
I mean, you could cut into it, yeah. It is possible that you could just wrap the string around it and sort of cut in like that, and
Oh
then just
yeah.
fix the seam. So just imagine taking this and wrapping it around your character, and
Right.
and then just giving it a good tug, and sort of solidifying the aluminum. But yeah, sometimes you live and learn that way.
True.
you know um, uh, it it's not always necessary, but yeah, sometimes you just have to dig into it and remove it. So
Gotcha.
now I've got him strung up and without a knife in sight. So anyway, he's connected. Um, Let me show you what I was going to do here. Now, we talked about symmetry early on, about posing this guy and creating a sort of a T-pose in the armature and then posing it. And I wanted to show you how I approached this hand here, and this is kind of the way I like to approach hands. Because he's going to be kind of posed in a shape and wrapped around this form here, and it's really about the volume of this leg as opposed to the volume of this arm.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't want to just sort of block in a big chunk and then carve out fingers. What I'd like to do was come up with a hand that felt like it was somewhat proportioned the way I wanted to the character.
Yeah.
They're huge monster hands, of course, but what I'll do is create a very basic hand, same thing you do in in CG, and
Yeah.
just do it in it looks like a garden mitt,
Yeah.
just a glove, and not even get too detailed about it. Just make sure that say the middle finger is longer, that's right proportions, that type of thing, and then just use that to sort of pose it on the form. And at least it's not going to look like anything useful to begin with, but I've got the right volume of clay.
Yeah.
I'm not really guessing at getting the exact same
Oh,
volume
right.
and sculpting it out. So it's a good start for me to help find this shape here.
Oh, definitely.
And then when I get down to that level of forms, that's when I'll start to use a tool, to define these fingers a little bit and sort of indicate at least the knuckles with a pinch, and start to find the volume and figure out where I'm going to do with the thumb, and just start to rough it in, and then start to refine that shape a little bit more and get that structure of the hand.
Oh, yeah.
Always using my own hand for reference. So
Mm-hmm. I really like the big hands on him. It seems particularly menacing, I guess, in my opinion.
yeah, it's funny. I've always done sort of caricatured types of hands, big monstery hands like this.
Yeah.
So I really like caricature and stuff, and it's sort of suited to this. So it needed to be something that made it feel like he was just this superhero is nothing more than a child in the hands of this monster.
Right.
He's way outmatched.
Oh,
So,
yeah. That's great.
yeah. But that's the basic idea. So anyway, you got any more questions?
No, we don't have any questions yet, guys.
Great.
We're going to be done in about 10 minutes, so please ask anything that you want. Henry is certainly available. You brought up caricature, Henry. Is that something that you would just enjoy, or do you practice it? I feel like caricature can teach you more about like how a face is structured, for example, by going like extremely beyond realism, and that can dial in how to understand a face, sort of.
Yeah, I think anytime we're doing any kind of a portrait, even if you consider it sort of photorealistic, it's a caricature of some sort.
Right.
You're pushing everything. It's just to the degree that you're pushing it.
Okay.
I was just watching a video today. I love this. There's a movie about Drew Struzan, who did the Harry Potter posters, the Star Wars posters. He's
Oh,
a
wow.
movie poster illustrator, and his stuff just looks alive, and it's because of just that subtlety of caricature. But it's not a photograph, right? It's not a
Hmm.
photocopy. It's pushed a little bit artistically, and I totally agree. I lean toward caricature because that's what I started with. Next to learning from my brother, who was a young artist, he brought home Mad magazines. So
Uh-huh.
that was my first exposure to any kind of art, was those cartoons and caricatures and things that were in those
Yeah.
magazines. So that's always been a real influence for me. And one of my favorite artists was Daumier, who did caricatures. Sort of started the whole world of caricature, doing caricatures of members of the French aristocracy and Parliament.
Oh,
So
wow.
just amazing
How
stuff.
do you spell his name?
Daumier, Daumier, Henri Daumier. He did sort of lithographic caricatures,
Yeah.
and just hundreds of them,
Oh, wow,
and
you're
making
right.
political statements. But he also did a lot of terracotta busts of members of the French politic, and they were almost reference images for him. So I'm just a big fan of his work. The pieces still exist. They're unfired terracotta, and several of them are still at the Louvre in France. It's amazing that
Wow.
they've held together all this time. But
Yeah. Wow, that's
yeah,
fantastic.
did you Google him?
Yeah, I did. That's awesome.
Yeah, you gotta love it. So, so
Wow.
yeah, so this guy's coming along. Um, I've got a good layer of monster clay on here, and so I'm just gonna build up a quick forearm here. I guess you can see that in the mirror.
Yeah.
And I'll just come right up to the wrist there, and then we'll decide, what that transition will be. But now that I've got the basic volume on here, this is where I can start to sort of refine these shapes and bulk them out, start to lay in pieces that might begin to indicate some of the muscle volume.
Gotcha.
Gives triceps and biceps and shoulders. And at this point, especially with this monster clay, it's just great to pull off little daubs of clay and stick them on,
Yeah.
and that might be the kind of thing where I'm really paying attention from one side to the other, making sure that my silhouettes are similar and similar volumes. And I'm rotating this guy and looking at him from all angles to
Yeah.
make sure that I'm not straying at all. And that's the main thing with bulking this out, is making sure that these proportions are correct, the volume versus the length, and that the pose is feeling right, and we're getting all of this sort of where we want it before we lock ourselves in with more detail, or create a lot of detail that we might have to break if we see a problem.
Right. Does the monster clay, is it fairly malleable, like in your fingers, or will it continue to cool even though you're kneading it between your fingers?
Once it's sort of warm and kneaded like this, it's gonna stay this soft for quite a while, and it probably won't be for a few hours that I'll come back and it'll be fairly stiff. What I'm
Yeah.
pulling out of the tub right now is just really soft and gooey,
Oh,
and
wow.
it's just perfect for you know gobbing this up and building up these volumes. But yeah, probably within a few hours, or definitely by the time I come back to it tomorrow, will have cooled off. And I can always toss it in the refrigerator if I want to chill it down a little bit.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Man, still, that was an hour ago when you heated it up. That's really
Yeah, it's
impressive to me.
amazing. The tubs, they did a really good job there of, if you've looked at the videos and seen me working with the Chavant clay, I pretty much had to keep that stuff warm all the time in a slow cooker, you know.
Yeah.
And if I unplugged it, it would definitely be, almost too hard to work within an hour.
Good grief.
But yeah, this is all working pretty good. I'm starting to bump up against some foil in places. I may have to do some surgery on this guy, but definitely getting the volumes on here.
Yeah.
I have to. Feeling pretty good about that hand. I can just pull this guy off and we'll set him aside. And I don't know if everybody in the that's watching has been over to Sculpting Cookie and looked at the videos there, but we have our video from our last hangout, and there's plenty of great information there about working with different kinds of clays and things. So, and plenty of great videos about sculpting in Blender as well, and ZBrush, right?
Yeah, oh yeah,
so,
for sure.
Lots of great information there.
Yeah, we've got a question. Will there be a third live stream, or will we be seeing the detail of the character you're working on, I think he's talking about, in a Citizens series? So there hopefully there'll definitely be a third and fourth, hopefully many more after that live streams. But yeah, we are planning on doing a citizen course about hero versus villain.
Exactly. Yeah, and Tim von Ruden's working on some designs now. It'll be very different from what you're seeing here. Just a sneak peek. We're talking about working in a female character, but trying to do a similar thing with a really dynamic pose. Some interaction between two characters. And we'll do some more live streams and really talk about more about like the rhythm between these two characters and start to add in some detail. I'd love to share that with you. Yeah. I'm really excited about it. Like I said, I'm anxious to get in here and give this guy some interesting musculature and popping veins and that type of thing. So.
I love that you're teasing it, because I cannot wait for the hero and villain course. That's just going to be awesome.
Yeah, I'm really excited to see what Tim comes up with. I love to collaborate on stuff.
Definitely, Tim's the man for sure. Oh, by the way, if anyone did not see it, Lamont Robinson posted. If anyone wants to read Andrew Loomis's books, they're online as PDFs now, and he posted a link. So that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, it is. They're still available. They're available now in hard copy from like Amazon and stuff. But yeah, somebody. That's how I got my copy. They called it the Loomis Project. And yeah, that's great. He posted them in PDF. It's excellent. They're really great books. So
good deal. Thanks for that, Lamont.
Yeah.
All right, we've got about 2 more minutes, so I guess we'll start wrapping it up.
Cool. Well, I'm glad you guys came and hung out with us. Got a little more sculpting in this time. It's probably not as fun to watch me as it is to actually grab some clay and do it. So I'm hoping you guys will get excited about actually doing some physical sculpting. I mean, I like doing both in the computer and with the clay, but I really think you'll benefit as an artist by getting your hands dirty and playing with some clay and doing more practical art, drawing and doing anything where you're just studying the form and working that ability to conceptualize between 2D and 3D.
Absolutely. All right, well, thanks everybody for watching, and hopefully we'll be doing one again very soon, probably in another couple of weeks. But yeah, feel free to watch this again. It'll be up on YouTube momentarily after we finish broadcasting. And certainly go check out Sculpt Cookie for lots of good content that's been posted there already. So thanks, Henry, so much for what you doing and taking the time to do this.
Sure. All right, see you guys later.
See ya.